And what is Dr. Wallerstein's connection to the hospital here?
Oh, all right, let me explain that. First of all, Dr. Wallerstein is chairman of the Department of Psychiatry for the entire UC, San Francisco. Our hospital is one of the teaching hospitals. This one is one of the teaching hospitals, and Bob is my chairman.
Mhm.
Um, there are other teaching hospitals in the unit too, but this is one. And in this regard, he is our chairman.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay?
Mhm. Mhm. Um, so your husband finished his work in 79.
Yes.
That was at Toledo.
Yes, at
Mhm.
University of Toledo.
And you've now moved. You're moved here.
Yes.
Bought a house.
Right. Yes, that was recent. And you'll see just this summer we for a year rented a house and then looked for um a house that probably will be our lifetime house and found a delightful house very close to medical campus, which you haven't yet seen. Medical campus is about 15 minutes from here. So that I can indeed walk down the mountain to work when I'm over on medical campus, where part of my teaching goes on too. And we have a delightful view of the bay and the mountains of Marin. And it's a very satisfactory house.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
that's nice to find a good
Right.
house. So you're settled into
Oh,
San
yes,
Francisco now.
very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And is your husband writing or what?
Louis is mainly, for some time, Louis has been doing editorial work, very strong at that. He certainly was responsible for my getting out all of the last three books in many ways. Is a very strong editorial consultant, a stern teacher of his wife. I'm much indebted to him. And at this point, Louis probably will take on other editorial jobs as they interest him, but mainly he's having a hell of a good time because he reads and reads and reads, and he doesn't have to prepare for any lectures. It's the dream of the English professor, you know. So, in many ways, it's like having our long summer vacations together. Oh,
Where is he? Like you and who became so wonderful. Um, it was a great conversation. Uh, Portions of which I reproduce in the book between Kassav and Al Lowenstein in early '72, I guess. Lowenstein had been a great supporter of McDonald's in the beginning. So many people started out as great supporters of McDonald, believing in his innocence. Kassav was the most ardent and vociferous. He testifies at that Article 32 hearing that he knows Jeff, and he knows Jeff could never have done this. He says, if I ever had another daughter, I still want the same son-in-law. And the army colonel's crying, and oh my God, it's so emotional and wonderful. The guy has McDonald has this ability to convince you that he is worthy of that kind of commitment on your behalf. And Al Lowenstein went through the same thing. Well, he was a congressman I remember that he was only a congressman for one term, I guess. Remember in early '70s for you in New York then?
Yeah.
Lowenstein?
Yeah.
He he did a lot to argue McDonald's case on the case against the army and the army's trampling on this guy's rights. And gradually, as he began to look into it a little more, Lowenstein found things that didn't add up. And gradually came to the opinion that MacDonald had committed the murders. There was something very wrong with the guy. And then he has a fascinating thing in this conversation with Masari. He said, he says, I found myself then faced with a real ethical dilemma. He said, because I'm paraphrasing, but it's in the book and I actually have it on tape. He said, who appointed me to play God? What was I to do at that point? Was I to go to the Justice Department and say, listen, I think you guys are onto something? There's something, you can't do that because MacDonald, in a sense, he said I had an attorney-client relationship with MacDonald.
Yeah.
To the extent that I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't go any further along the lines of proclaiming his innocence. He said, so I never told him. He said, I never sat down and told him that I thought he was guilty, but I did suggest that this seemed now to be more a matter of criminal defense, and maybe I could introduce him to some good criminal lawyers in North Carolina. And that was, but I was stepping out of it. But even there, he stopped short of saying, I think you're guilty, but it's obvious from the change in his demeanor and his attitude and his behavior toward MacDonald that his stance has shifted. But MacDonald just ignores all this. I mean, there is this denial mechanism present that he will see, as one of the psychologists testifies at the grand jury, if you present him with, actually this was Dr. Bailey, a psychiatrist, I believe, who said this, that his testing shows that if he has a kind of denial mechanism where if you give him 20 pieces of data, he's capable of absorbing only the 3 or 4 that might be perceived as favorable to his interests. He simply cannot. He does not have the capacity to absorb the 15 or 16 or 17 that would be contrary to his interests. So if I write him 10 letters in which I express sympathy, then the fact of my not doing a whole bunch of things. I mean, if I were such a great friend of his, logically, the day that he's released from prison after 11 months, I'd be on the first plane out to California to say, Jeff, God, I'm so happy you're out of jail. I didn't do that. I felt I couldn't go near him. I didn't want to break off all contact with him because I'm still, I still have this awkward situation where he remains my subject. And I'm now at the point where I feel uncomfortable about expressing sympathy for him or warmth or but I can't turn 180 degrees and start to write the guy nasty letters or say, there will be a pause in our correspondence while I reevaluate my relationship to you on the basis of new information that I'm receiving. But I suppose I could do that. I could have done that. But I certainly wouldn't feel under any obligation to do that. And I don't think that a writer can be placed under such an obligation. No. And there had to come a time when you're dealing, so with Mason over a period of months.
Yeah, about a year.
A year. During the course of that, wasn't there a time when you found yourself, your opinions in regard to him and the authenticity of what he was doing and his motivation, the things were beginning to form a little more clearly in your own mind?
Sure.
These would be opinions which, if you expressed them to him, he would perceive them as being negative.
Sure.
But you didn't go to him, did you, and say, gee, I think I better tell you now that I'm beginning to form opinions that are not going to make you happy? No. I mean, that's the point. Steve MacDonald's argument would be that that you would have an obligation to do that. And I just don't think that writers can function if those kinds of obligations. This is the invasion of your privacy, right? Do you have to come in and give them a random warning? Or do you have to,
Well,
what do you have to do?
yeah.
This is, always you're up against subjects who, yeah, as Wambach says, 3 times out of 4, even people who you feel you are on their side, you are portraying them with great sympathy. They're likely to find things that they say, well, I don't know, I didn't like that, I didn't like this,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And
the issue really is of telling any subject anything. I mean, they're by the saying, if you were obliged to tell somebody who you thought was innocent that they're guilty, that you changed your mind. I mean, you would have to tell people all kinds of other
of
things.
course,
I mean, there are a lot of people you write about who, I mean, even this whole question of whether you're writing sympathetically or not about a person is so, there's no objective truth about that.
that's right.
In the case of Mason, I thought there was a pretty good chance that he might have liked what I wrote because it was all stuff that he told me. I mean, he
Yeah.
wasn't somebody who would be to everybody's taste, but you know, he had this extravagance and this you know, he just didn't care. He was kind of larger than life and he was fun
And he seemed to revel
and he reveled in
yeah,
being a bad boy.
yeah.
So I didn't know, but I thought that it's possible, given his character, that he would read this and say, "Yeah, this is the way I enjoy being presented." Well, he didn't. I was probably naive to think that um, he was as you know, as good as he seemed. I mean, there is something kind of awesome about a person who is so irreverent and he kind of he didn't live up to his own image somehow, the image that he was projecting. I mean,
Yeah.
this may be the same with MacDonald, but he sounds as if he kind of chickened out of the role that he was playing with you.
Well, yes, the role was that he would bare his heart and soul to me, and I would be perfectly free to write about him in any manner that I deemed best. And then the unspoken continuation of that in his own mind was, but of course, I know that it's going to come out my way. That's the assumption that he always carried with him. Now, I say that I can't be held legally responsible for his pathology.
Yeah.
If he suffers from a denial mechanism that is so all-encompassing and powerful as to put him into the pathological category, whether it's the 5% or the 11% or whatever, then it's not up to me to devise ways to overcome his denial mechanism to make sure that he really understands. I mean, a lot of other people could have inferred from the change in my tone, as you'll see in the correspondence. You know, but I think a pretty, you know, in reviewing it, it seems to me a pretty obvious, you know, change after 6 or 7 months. Certainly after 3 years, you know, I'm down to writing, you know, the bare minimum that I need to keep him informed about matters relating to the publication process. You know,
Yeah.
he he recognizes this. And he writes, as I said, he wrote that letter saying, "Gee, what happened to the old camaraderie? You know, it's just he just, you know, my old friend Joe." Well, this was a sham to begin with, my old friend Joe. This is him trying to bring me into his universe and put me close to the center, so I'll feel good, and therefore, if I feel good, I'll be grateful to him and will portray him in a manner that pleases him. This is a narcissistic power trip, you know, which ultimately didn't succeed, uh, because I was in my immersion period when all that was going on, and then the writing takes place when I'm in my detachment period, which is, you know, what we all go through. You don't write. You don't go home and play the tapes tonight and write the piece tomorrow. When this, you know, you do this for months, and then you divorce yourself. You know, there comes a time when you stop talking to the people you're writing about. You don't want to hear from them anymore. You're finished. You know, now that's if something new happens, you keep up with it. But in all my work, I've come to a point where I was just drawing the line and said, well, that's the end now.
Yeah.
It's time for me to go home and close the door and unplug the phone and just begin to find out what I really think. And that's when it really begins to happen. MacDonald would have it seem as if he and I were old fraternity buddies, and we went into this enterprise together because, gosh, I care so much about what happened to Jeff, my great old pal. But he actually testified, so this would be pathetic if it weren't so uh, so goofy. Maybe it's pathetic anyway. He testified at one point during the trial that during my trial this summer, that during the course of the time I was with him at his trial in 1979, that he at that point considered me his fourth best friend. Now, what 43-year-old Princeton-educated physicians do you know who walk around, ranking their friends?
I
1,
know,
2, 3,
I
4.
know. That is pathetic.
Um,
It's a great detail.
It's his fourth best friend. Yes, he says, I guess Bernie was number 1 and Mike was number 2, or maybe Doug was number 2 and Mike was number 3, but Joe was 4. I was sitting there, I'm looking at Cornstein. I was at corner of my eye, saying, "Is this really happening? Are we in court because he thought it was his fourth best friend?" And also, how pathetic it is. I hadn't met this man until June 10th, 1979, and 5 weeks later, this guy who's beloved, by the thousands of people that he's given so much of himself to over the years, that suddenly I skyrocket to a position in his pantheon of being his
Right. Well, he's probably somebody who just goes to people, right?
Exactly.
Everybody's been his fourth best friend.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, these days no friends at all.
Well, he has a cult following, which is a different kind of a thing.
But no, probably nobody lasts long. That's it.
Well, his old Princeton roommate did.
Really?
Yeah. There may be a homosexual component to that relationship, which I couldn't even hint at in fact for obvious reasons. There's not wanting to libel or defame the Princeton roommate, who's an unmarried lawyer in Phoenix who has pictures of McDonald all at his apartment. They took their vacations together, and it's McDonald in all the psychiatric and psychological stuff. This homosexuality theme comes up with him a lot, and he brings it up a lot. When no one else does, he introduces, he says, and then they said that I had a homosexual. And then you go back and you find that no one ever said that, and he just sort of fantasized that someone had said that. And after a while, you begin to wonder, what that means, and then you begin to wonder if it's even relevant. But the point is, his level of dealing with people is that of like a junior high school, where you rank your friends and where you care. And
it's really
and
such a great detail.
Yeah, you look at the context of his testimony. It's really. It would have been funny if it was. I think I'm out of the top 10. I've fallen off the charts, right? But he, with women too, his relationships with women continually were with women who were much, much younger than he was and had no education whatsoever. And they're all of a type, interchangeable, It's just a Barbie doll where you just change the clothes. It's just.
I love the name of that girlfriend. It's unbelievable.
Well, a couple of them have been changed because of privacy reasons.
Oh, I see.
This may be a real one, though. Which one?
Sherry.
Oh, Sherry Size Love is real.
I thought that was real. You could have done that.
Who could make it up? Yeah. It's real, and I kept it in there. This is interesting. I really should have, to protect her identity, I think. I certainly could have, if I had wanted to protect her identity, changed that name. But the name was so good that I didn't change it. And the book is published, and she is still working as a stewardess for American Airlines. And a year goes by, and I don't hear anything from Sherry Size. The paperback comes out, and then the thing is on the movie, the miniseries is out. It's great ratings. She calls me up in tears from California. I said, "Oh, why couldn't you have changed my name the way you changed the names of other people? Do you know the problems I'm having? My size love is not that kind of name. You say that I'm a stewardess, and every time I walk down the aisle, somebody's got your paperback in his hands. He's, hey, look, there's McDonald's girlfriend." She says they've had to take me off flight duty. And she was really somebody who, I hesitate to say it, but was suffering damages as a result of the publication of this book, emotional distress and actual. And she called up, not threatening to sue me or anything. She just said, is there anything you can possibly do to change my name now, or is it too late? And I said, no, there are still, will be future editions of the book printed, and I'll change your name. I'll make sure that they change the name for all future editions. I can't change what's already been printed, but she said that would be just wonderful for you to do. So I did. It was a small thing to do, and she's a nice person, and I didn't like to see her suffering. So they give her some other name. I don't even know what it is in the new book. Now the trial is taking place this summer, and MacDonald is testifying, and Kornstein is zeroing in on the point that nowhere in any correspondence and nowhere in any conversation overheard by anyone else do I ever say to MacDonald, I'm going to write a book that's going to portray you as innocent. It just didn't ever happen. MacDonald has testified that in 4 or 5 private conversations where only he and I were present, I said that.
Yeah.
And Kornstein is saying this is ridiculous. It only happens when you're around, but not when anyone else is around, and making the point that this is not to be believed. And MacDonald, so Kornstein says, was there any time ever, once, when McGinniss ever said to you, in the presence of anyone else, that he was going to write a book that would portray you as innocent? MacDonald says, yes, there was. When was that? He says, it was in October of 1980, dinner at my house with my then fiancee, Sherry Sislove, and she overheard him say this. So I said to Kornstein, well, I said, it never happened. I said, but I can't guarantee you that Sherry Sislove isn't going to come in here, and say that it did.
Yeah.
But I still had a phone number for her from this experience of changing her name. So I called her, and she was home, but perchance. And I said, hey, your name was brought up to trial today. And she says, oh, do you know what they're trying to get me to do? She says, they're trying to make me come in here and testify. And they want me to testify. And I told them I wouldn't. I said, don't come near me. I said, you people wouldn't want to hear what I have to say. And she said, they told me that they're going to subpoena me. And I said, you better not, because they were trying to get her to come in out of loyalty to Jeff and perjure herself, right? And she wouldn't do it. And she told me. And she said, but please don't you make me come either, because I said, now this could be very useful. Actually, Sherry Sislove, we can call her in. She can say, I never heard McGinniss ever say that. And what's more, MacDonald's lawyers tried to get me to come in and say that I did. And she said, oh, please, I just want to forget it. I just want to forget it. Don't make me go through this. So I said to Kornstein, I said, look, she talked to me and explained all this to me, but has asked me to please not call her. So let's not. And we didn't. But it was interesting that she said the reason that she would never, ever, ever even entertain any notion of testifying on MacDonald's behalf was because the one time she asked me to do her a favor, I did her a favor. And that's her way of looking at it, that I did her a favor. If she hires Gary Boswick as her lawyer, he can call up and say, wait a minute, my client, he has suffered emotional distress, and she can sue me for $5 million, to get her name changed. So it's, I don't know, what do? You're dealing with real people. People's feelings are going to be hurt all the time. But when does it become a matter of litigation? That's for 200 years. The level, the first line of defense, and all you needed was to say, in regard to a public figure, that what you've done, what you've written is true.
Of course, this kind of journalism is new, isn't it? This is relatively new, these long articles or books about people. I don't know of anything in the 19th century that's comparable.
No.
It is Boswell's Life of Johnson.
I was just thinking of Boswell's Life of Johnson. That's a long nonfiction work about an individual, which was not authorized in the Iacocca sense.
It wasn't authorized, but it was so loving.
Well, it was. But did Johnson
But that's
clearly perceive it that way?
but it's biography, the way Jones's biography of Freud also.
Yes.
Those, I think, are probably the two best biographies because the person knew that the other person,
Right.
whereas most biographies are written by people long
Right.
after the person's dead and they don't have the life.
And a biography,
Whereas what you did here or my thing about Mason, that isn't really biography.
No.
It's a narrative and it's about some event.
it's a true story about real people
Yeah.
and things that happen to them,
Yeah.
things that they do.
Or at least profile form, maybe some, I mean, there have been profiles in the New Yorker where there isn't any particular action necessarily, but it's a,
Right.
it's a kind of form of biography of a person who's still alive. I think this is all kind of new.
Well, new meaning 20 years though.
Oh yeah, I mean of this time, of this century,
Yeah, right.
of this period, and it's certainly been kind of accelerating, and the lawsuits are also real.
Well, the lawsuits have there's been a gap. The lawsuits haven't to catch up with it for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
Because well, why? But the standards, even with newspapers have had a standard that had to be all libel cases originally were involving newspapers. So that's people they printed that in the paper is not true. I sue from libel. That's been the history. New York Times versus Sullivan. This is just the classic case. It's a newspaper thing.
There's another different element in newspapers. People go out from the newspaper and cover news. In your situation, in my situation with Mason, it's well, not with Mason, but in other. I guess there is a parallel. I approached Mason the way you approached MacDonald,
Mm-hmm.
and then that subject, for whatever reason, wanted this long piece or book written about them. That's different than newspaper stories where usually there isn't that element of desire on the part of the subject, right?
Well, there's a desire to be written about in the newspaper. If the Washington Post style section calls you up and says you'd like to send a reporter up and do a piece about you and your lifestyle in New York, and you say, "Oh, okay," well, you're expressing a desire to be
It's true.
thinking about it. If Renata Adler cooperates with a profile from Manhattan Inc. or something, and sure, I mean, it's a question of quantity or degree, but not qualitatively.
Right. Yeah.
And the same standards would apply. If you have a relationship with a person that's ongoing over a period of months or years, obviously there's going to be the personal component will be larger than if you have a relationship that exists only for a period of hours.
Yeah.
But
it's part of the same.
It's part of the same. And should your freedom as a writer be limited by the inevitable fact that the personal component is going to be there?
Yeah.
MacDonald's claim is that this may have started as a professional author-subject thing, but it quickly moved beyond that to where it was a friendly relationship where he came to feel that he could rely upon me because I acted friendly to him.
Well, I think most judges would just say, "So what? What is that?"
Well, I would think so too. I would think so
The
too.
important thing is that it started out as a pretty business-like contractual.
Couldn't be more business-like.
Yeah.
We actually had a signed document, which I'd never had before with anybody in my life. And then the judge says, well, because of the signed document, because it says here essential integrity, doesn't that mean McGinniss had an obligation to maintain his integrity? Well, first of all, what does that mean, essential integrity? And second of all, the answer is no, because I didn't sign any document that said, I hereby maintain that to the best of my ability, I will tell your story in keeping with the essential integrity. This is a release that he signs.
Now, does he claim that you somehow lured him into friendship also? Or does he just sort of begin with the fact that there was the friendship that was betrayed?
Well, he can't. Now, he never really said that I lured him into friendship. but that over the course of the trial, these weeks, this author-subject relationship became more than that because we talked about things that didn't directly relate to the trial. We talked about how the Yankees were doing. We talked about running the New York City Marathon. We talked about my children. We talked about things.
Yeah.
And he said that carried it. That if it was strictly an author-subject relationship, he would never have spoken about anything beyond the events of the day as they pertained to his criminal case. The fact that that we talked about more than that. The fact that we would eat dinner together and go to a movie, or that I mean, you hear him talk about it. It sounds like we were dating through the suburbs. This thing. I mean, look, there's a fraternity house with 16 or 18 people living in different rooms. So I was in one of the rooms. He was in one of the rooms. I didn't become his roommate through the summer. And it was my purpose to spend as much waking time with him as I possibly could. This was a rare opportunity to see the defendant in a triple homicide trial right up close, under the microscope, day by day. And 2 years later, I was going to be alone, sitting in a room, writing the story. All these impressions that I was forming were going to have to be there for me to draw upon. So obviously, I sought the fullest possible. Part of the way I function as a reporter is to put myself into a situation as unobtrusively as possible, so that pretty quickly people get used to the fact that there's this guy there with his notebook, and pretty soon the notebook just becomes like an extension of my arm, and they don't pay any more attention to me writing. And then if you're in the middle of dinner with somebody, you're sitting at a table of 8 people, and somebody says something, well, you don't necessarily put back your notebook, right then and say, just a minute, write this down. You can remember something somebody says for a half an hour, and then you can write it down, later. It's just a question of being unobtrusive. In situations like that, I don't use a tape recorder. It's different from having, a set conversation or interview. Here, there's no action, right? You're not interested in following me through a day of my life to watch how I interact with the people in Williamstown. We're here to talk about this thing. MacDonald, he's on trial, when he's out of the courtroom in the evenings, I don't want to sit down and interview him. There's going to be plenty of time for that later, and Lord knows we got plenty of tapes from MacDonald later. Then I'm just trying to let events unfold as much as possible as if I were not there. Now, it's not ever possible to achieve that total, to have no impact whatsoever. It's like in physics when Bohr, I think, was the one to first observe that the very act of performing, the very act of observation altered.
Is that Heisenberg's law?
Well, was that Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, or wasn't that Bohr's Heisenberg's uncertainty thing? I think was more around the lines of you cannot determine the velocity, and you cannot determine more than one property about an object at the same time.
Well, we're both, whatever it is, if you introduce the...
Well, let me find it here. I have a small, but I spent 8 months. It's true that the very presence there as an observer alters the behavior of that which is being observed. I try to minimize that.
Yeah.
But for a period of time, I have found the more time, it's not a law of journalistic physics, that the more time you spend with a subject, the less is the degree of variation in their behavior because of your presence. In other words, the more used to you they get, the more they go back to behaving the way they normally would behave if you weren't there. Because, well, that's the uncertainty. They seem less obviously aware of your presence. Maybe unconsciously they're still behaving in a different way, but certainly they pay less attention to, they pay less conscious attention to you. They seem to take less note of your presence. And you know empirically when they begin doing things and saying things that they probably would not be doing or saying if they were conscious of the fact that you were still there recording it.
But maybe it's not that they're not conscious that you're there. They're not conscious. They become less conscious of you there as a journalist.
That's right.
And you become like a real person.
You become like a friend. Yeah. You become the split we have here. You know, they lose sight of the fact that there is this this cold eye that must be cast at a later date, and they see you only as the sympathetic,
like a person in their lives rather than somebody who was outside.
That's right.
Yeah.
And when you're a person in their lives, unless you're an adversary, a person toward whom they feel animosity, which in some cases, I suppose, you know, you would accomplish your task better by being confrontational and challenging, but not, I think, when you want over a long period of time to come to understand somebody. If you're just immediately confrontational, it seems like that's kind of inhibited.
So I think there are some people that this is Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci,
Yeah.
who evidently works in a sort of totally confrontational manner. I mean, she just comes up to people and says, you know, you fascist pig.
Well, that's right. The rest she does is interviews.
Yeah.
You know, she'll do a 3-hour interview.
Yeah.
And she'll be confrontational. Mike Wallace is that way on television. You know, he'll give all the goods ahead of time and then, you know, spring for the throat. And it's very effective. But you're not going to have Oriana Fallaci living in your house, writing the definitive Janet Malcolm piece for 6 months if every time you come down to breakfast, she's calling you a fascist pig.
Yeah.
You know, you just can't do that. So things that you observe about people that you find unappealing or distasteful, you tend not to call their attention to. You know, it's like, by the way, MacDonald, you know, the fact that you wear white shoes, you know, with your brown suit every day really is getting on my nerves. And I'm going to put this in the book and say, I make you look stupid. You don't do that. Right? You just, you let them live their lives as naturally as possible, given the fact of your presence and understanding that it is going to alter things to some degree. They, as their co-counsel, as Siegel hired a North Carolina lawyer named Wade Smith to be his co-counsel. Wade Smith has said subsequently that what they were doing was they were grasping for immortality. They thought, let's bring this writer in here and he can write about, you know, how Siegel was confident he was going to win the case. MacDonald was confident he was not going to be convicted. And then we're going to have this writer in there who could just go out and tell this story and make them, you know, larger than life figures, you know, and this is right in keeping with MacDonald's narcissistic need for fame. To see going through the book over and over and over again. He's obsessed with this.
It's interesting that here he was kind of fighting for his life, but he was also interested in this other thing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Indeed, the closer anything ever came, the closer that he came to being forced to fight for his life, the more interested he was in this other thing. He first contacted Wambach only 3 weeks after he was indicted by the grand jury in 1975 about writing a book. I mean, you're indicted for the murder of your spouse and children, and within 3 weeks you're going to be thinking about, let's see, who do I want to write the story? You know, it's amazing. He goes on a Dick Cavett show back in 1970, within 2 weeks after being released by the Army. He gets back to New York and he's on the Dick Cavett show. If you watch that tape, it is just, you get goosebumps. It's so spooky. The guy's sitting there laughing, making jokes on national television with Dick Cavett. He's on there talking about the murder of his wife and children. He's using this as a vehicle for celebrity. It's there's something bothersome about somebody who would take that kind of an event as a personal tragedy of this magnitude. Let's say he didn't do it. And this always bothered me about him from the start. Why isn't he more reluctant to talk about this? Why is he not just not reluctant, but as I later came to find, desperate to capitalize on this tragedy and use it as his one springboard to fame? Well, ultimately, I think I came to sense what some of the answers to that were. It's not like he had just flown an airplane across the Atlantic Ocean for the first time and was reveling in the fame of the crew. This was the murder of his wife and kids. Grasping an immortality. They wanted that, and they were willing to take the risk. They knew who I was. They were familiar with my work, and they could become as more familiar with it as they wanted to be. They books, two of the three books were at that point still in print. There's no secrets. You can read magazine pieces I've written about. Look me up. It's in the library. Go ahead. Is this a guy who writes hagiography? Am I just somebody whose mission in life seems to be to glorify? So I get curious about something, and I'll go write about it. And
What happened to Wombo? Why did he drop out, or was he dropped by them?
well, it never got to the point. In 75, Wamba sent MacDonald a letter in which he told him basically that it would be his story and not MacDonald's story, and what the deal would be, without getting specific about money. And MacDonald sent a note to Seal, said, "What do you think? He sounds arrogant as hell. On the other hand, if he writes it, it's a sure bestseller." That was on MacDonald's mind. MacDonald was trying to get Wamba, but Wamba wouldn't go to North Carolina for the trial. He was in the middle. At that time, Wamba had a book, which I think is a novel that he wrote, called The Black Marble. I haven't read it, but it was being turned into a film, and he was producing the film himself. And so he was in the middle of all that and said, "I can't go to this trial. If you can get the trial videotapes and send me the videotapes, and if I can have a camera crew go in to your fraternity house at night and stuff and film you people, and I can work with that, maybe you can do something."
He's grand.
Yeah, yeah. And MacDonald has said different things about Wamba, including the fact that Wamba offered him $200,000 to $300,000. Wamba says,
Would that have been possible for there to be this film crew at the trial? I mean, would the judge?
The judge would not
No,
permit videotape. No. In some states, and in some federal districts, I don't know if there's any cameras allowed in federal court, but state by state now, many states have television. Wamba, though, I think what happens with Wamba was MacDonald met Wamba the same day he met me. And what I really think happened, especially having met Wamba myself now, Wamba had this 15 years, 10 years, something like that, experience as a Los Angeles homicide detective. Wamba was a guy who comes on pretty strong, as you can reading his testimony. He'll look you right in the eye with a cop's look, and I think MacDonald could tell after an hour that Wamba just wasn't having any of it. But Wamba made it very clear that he thought MacDonald was somebody. He wasn't sympathetic. He wasn't somebody who. I think MacDonald recognized he couldn't con Wamba, and was afraid to try because he recognized that what was likely to come out of it would be not what he wanted. With me, I think he figured, "Hey, I got somebody here. Maybe I can, maybe I can fool this guy." And I didn't do anything to disabuse him of that notion for a long, long time. And that, comes down to being one of the questions. How far can you go in letting the subject think that they are manipulating you? he is clearly trying to manipulate me. At some point, I become aware of the fact that he's trying to manipulate me. I think from the beginning. What obligation do I have to say, wait a minute, I think you're manipulating me now. I have to call your attention to the fact that I'm aware of this, and just so you understand that you're not succeeding. Right? Do little bells have to go off when things get to a certain point, and you have, and this has never been the case before. This is why this would inhibit any but the most superficial kind of reporter. We could all go out and cover fires, and interview survivors standing in the street. But to get beyond that, to get inside somebody's personality, to try to do anything other than biographies of the dead. How can you write about living people without getting up close to them and learning who they are? How do you get up close to them and learn who they are without developing some sort of personal relationship at the same time that you have your professional relationship? It's clearly always a professional relationship. I mean, if you go to see MacDonald to write a book about him, and you fall in love with him during the trial, and you decide that once he's acquitted, you're going to marry him, and you become engaged while the jury is deliberating, and then he's taken off in chains, and then because he's in jail, you don't get to see him, and then you come, and stop and think, gee, maybe he did it after all, and you write this book that makes him look guilty. He can say, she deceived me into having this personal relationship only so she could get more information out of me. Well, all right, that's a personal relationship if you just had to marry somebody. Where did my relationship with MacDonald go beyond that of author and subject? The fact that we would converse about current events, the fact that we would talk about, well, he didn't read any books, but movies, I don't know.
But look, do you have any doubt about this yourself? I mean, you're sort of putting this as kind of rhetorical questions. I mean, are you completely convinced in your own mind or not? But what are you saying here?
Convinced about what?
That, that everything was, that you wouldn't change it in any way, that this is a...
I can't think of anyone who would change this.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that the legal argument that he's advancing would have it be that such conduct as I engaged in, to the extent that it's even conduct, all I was being me and doing my reporting thing.
Yeah.
There's no other way I would know how to do it.
Yeah.
Can limits be imposed, which you would look back upon what I did and say, well, under these new limits, clearly McGinniss, went too far here. Yeah, some of the jurors apparently think so.
Yeah.
They say, well, he should never have written those letters. Well, if I was fabricating the emotional component of those letters, I think one could argue that as a matter of journalistic ethics, this would have fallen short of the highest degree. I still don't think it brings it anywhere near the realm of litigation. And I would also say that in this instance, that's not the case. As anybody who spent any time talking to me in those months after the verdict can tell you, I didn't know what the hell to say.
Yeah.
When you've been put on a defensive for 3 years about something that you did so naturally, and then you see it distorted and held up to this light, you see a sentence or a paragraph from the letter you wrote the guy, blown up on a huge screen in a courtroom, and taken out of the context of the overall.
Makes you never want to write a letter again.
Exactly. Boy, it really has inhibited my letter writing.
Yeah.
I talk on the phone now for an hour before I'll write a letter to anybody. Have you found the same thing with letters? Did you had no correspondence in case in that?
Fortunately, I didn't. I don't know. Maybe I was just sort of unconsciously wary. I mean, they were just a trivial notes.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't get.
See, I would never have written letters either, but this guy was in jail. I had no other way to communicate with him.
Sure.
And he's writing me these letters saying, this is what happened. This is what, I can't not respond to these letters.
Yeah. And things written, they take on a different life then. And they seem.
Absolutely.
Especially if sentences are taken out of them. Yeah, that must have been terrible for you to see your own sort of just easily written letters then.
Sure. Written thoughtlessly, without, I'll get a letter from MacDonald and I'll sit down and, I'm obsessed by this thing. This is eating me up day and night. All I can think about is this thing. Did he do it? Didn't he do it? I think maybe he did, but on the other hand, how could he have? And I'm still so, so torn up and upset by it. And I'll sit down and I'll write to the guy and I'll just dash it off, belittle them. You don't even proofread it, misspellings, typos, everything. Just take it out and send it off to the guy, right? Well, 5 years later, 6 years later, one of those paragraphs is being viewed by these 6 strangers in California, and they're saying, well, does that indicate that McGinniss was trying to deceive MacDonald? If so, is this a violation of some civil law?
It's horrible.
It is. Look, those letters are embarrassing. I wish I'd never written those letters. I suppose now I can say that I wish I'd never written them because I'm embarrassed at how genuine the feeling in those letters is. I'm embarrassed that somebody who's supposed to be as good at what he does as I am could have been so badly fooled by this guy. I console myself by saying, look, he's fooled a lot of other people, and that is the nature of the psychopath to be this way. And this is the first time I'd ever been confronted with this, and that's smart. But gee, and then on a deeper level, if we talk about the concept of evil and this act as being evil, and MacDonald being, how could I have been? What is it about that? Is there something about that evil that at some unconscious level I found attractive? I mean, this has caused me serious, periods of introspection in terms of what does it say about me that I didn't find myself repulsed by this guy the first day I laid eyes upon him. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's troublesome, but in terms of what could I have done differently? I could have been more guarded, more reserved. I could have been less human. I could have.
Yeah.
I think probably in dealing with subjects in the future, I would be much more cautious about putting anything on paper that could be twisted and distorted and used.
Yeah.
If there's theory gets anywhere. I mean, it's already gotten. We're still talking about it. I spent the whole summer, 49 days and nights out there. And may go back again. Amazing. Last night I had a dream. It's a retrial right now. I said, wait, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready yet. This can't be happening yet. I was actually back in the courthouse. She said, no, this is much too soon. I haven't recovered yet. I'm not ready. Well,
that was your dream?
Last night, yeah. It was, after this morning, I realized that I probably, my amateur analysis of my own dream is that I was probably, in regard to talking to you today, this was like somehow an extension. This was the new trial,
Yeah.
My amateur analysis of my own dreams may not be worth very much, but it didn't seem very subtle. The message was right on the surface. It's funny, I haven't, my dream life had been seriously affected by this thing. When I was writing the book, I would really have some bad dreams about dreams filled with bad feeling, for a long time. And this was being on trial was very much of a strain, but it was nothing. I can't say it was nothing, but in terms of the intensity of discomfort that I felt on a daily basis, it certainly was no greater than that I felt every day that I was writing this book. This was a terrible struggle. The thing that really, to come to terms with how could this man have done this to these people? It was so awful. My daughters are 21 and 19 now. They're just almost the same ages as a little bit younger. My oldest daughter is the age that his youngest would have been if he hadn't killed her. Now, you grow up, you have kids, you see them, they're the same. It's, how could a guy do this? How could he? That's the thing. I know that it proved he did, but I still can't accept the fact that he could have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially when he's writing to me and he's calling me on the phone. And I knew so little then about people who do bad things. I just hadn't had exposure to them. And now I see, well, there's Ted Bundy and there's this one and there's that one and there are these people out there. And there's enough of them so that they have names, generically. Psychopathic, all psychopaths are not also killers. And all killers are not psychopaths. And MacDonald might never kill a stranger. I don't think that he's the type who would, if he were not in that implosive kind of domestic situation, probably he's no threat to the man in the street. But good God, he certainly was a threat to his wife and children. But it's so hard to really overcome the last vestige of emotional doubt that he could have done it after having had any contact with them whatsoever. And many people still can't.
Yeah.
And that's why
But these are not the people we know, right?
That's right.
So,
and he's the guy. And people who do terrible things are not people who you would enjoy having dinner with because they're good to mouth. Good company. Maybe I wanted MacDonald to be good company because it made him. I mean, I don't know. If I met MacDonald, for example, and had no intention ever of writing about it, I don't know if I would have found his personality in the least bit appealing or intriguing or anything. Maybe this charm that I give him credit for that has impressed a lot of other people is only there when you want to see it. Maybe
it's there when he wants something from you, right?
I think I was just about to say, yes, that's right. He can turn it on when he wants something. Yeah, sure. It's certainly in his best interests to have me won over and feeling, flattered by his, attention toward me. I mean, it's, I don't want to stretch parallels beyond the point where the point where they become distorted, but Eisler and Mason, Eisler said, I look back, I should have known, I should have saw it, but Mason's always going through all these flattering things. There's Eisler's never had a guy go to someone.
I also realized that he must have done something very special with Eisler that he didn't do with me, even though he was trying to manipulate me and charm me. It was on a much different scale, and maybe it was something he wasn't able to do with women.
Yeah.
I found him very unattractive, and I just didn't buy him at all. Whereas Eisler was a brilliantly intelligent man, and I think the answer to it was that he got something from Mason that most of the rest of us didn't get.
Yeah, it's something which happens to be what he needed.
In
terms of having somebody who wasn't so put off by him. So I don't think MacDonald had anything that I needed emotionally, except he was. If you have a subject which you choose to write about, obviously you want as much cooperation and commitment from that subject to help to make himself available. So he gave me that, and he certainly was exercising all the charm. He tried to figure out, okay, what's going to impress McGinniss, consciously or unconsciously. I don't think that he sat there unconsciously. I don't know how the narcissistic charm mechanism really functions, but I suspect a lot of it is probably unconscious. That he just,
I would think so.
He just sort of, he recognizes intuitively this is the kind of person that McGinniss will be most impressed by.
Yeah.
So that's who I'm going to be for him, and he was. Likewise, when I'm with the subject, I can quickly tell which aspects of my personality are going to be most appealing to that subject, and which will make them feel most at ease and most comfortable. And there's a chameleon-like quality to being a reporter, where either you're the same non-entity and just blend into the wall, so you're just unnoticeable right from the start, or else you take on and reflect back certain facets of your subject's personality, and that as Buckley would put it, lubricates the flow of information. You don't do it by telling untruths or lies. You don't do it by insincere flattery, but you do it consciously and unconsciously by becoming more like who you're with. And, or at least not becoming more like them, picking up on what it is they would like to see in this person who's come to write about them, and becoming that.
But of course, this is something that goes on between all people who meet, right?
Yes, sure. If you want to be friends with somebody, you act in a way that's now. If you want to be friends, it's different from if you want to write about it, but it's not entirely different.
It's not. It's part of the same continuum, I think. It becomes more exaggerated in these special relationships, but.
See, MacDonald is saying that there was there's a line here, right? Author subject is on this side of the line, and then friends are on that side of the line. And at some point, it's not even a line, it's a fence. At some point, I jumped over the fence and stopped being A and started being B. And then, after I got all I could find being B, I jumped back over the fence and went back to being A, having everybody defrauded it. And that's, I think nonsense on its face.
Totally.
I mean, it's just not the way people deal with people.
Yeah. But it's something that could probably go over with totally ignorant members of it who don't know anything about any of this stuff. And it's very subtle stuff.
Yes, that's right. It's too subtle. And when Wambaugh and Buckley try to explain it in unsubtle terms by saying, well, it's okay to tell lies to your subjects, that's not, the jury didn't like that. Buckley says, well, it's not really a lie. How about if the Gestapo came in here? It was really a hilarious moment when Buckley says, if the Gestapo came in here and asked you which way Judge Ray went, and I said this way, he went this way, I said a lie, and Thomas Aquinas might say so, but I think was preserving an innocent life. And then he looks at the judge and says, at least you want to presume it's an innocent life. Oh, brought down the house. The judge smiled for the first time in the trial. Bill Buckley's one of his cultural icons, I suspect, being a Reagan appointment. This was a great thrill for him. The high point of his judicial career, like Bill Buckley cracking jokes with him up there on the bench. The jury was horrified. They said, who is this Buckley? This snotty accent, and thinks that he can, they didn't like him at all. They were very clear after the non-verdict to say, if you guys ever have to do this again, except for this one who wrote me the letter, number 2, she thought everybody was great, but she said, the others said, boy, don't bring back those guys. You didn't like them. And that psychiatrist with his chart there, keep him, get rid of him too, It's funny, because, you think, even the court stenographer, who has no vested interest in anything, but who came to express her opinions, as privately as things belong. She said that she thought that Joe Wambaugh had in his testimony, that was the single bust rip she'd ever seen testify in any court proceeding she'd ever been stenographer for years. Tremendous impact. We all thought, couldn't have been more wrong. It's a very humbling experience. You think, oh gosh, we've got this whole thing psyched out. Totally wrong.